Thank you, President Dooley. Give a round of applause for your president. Most of all, let me say I'm so grateful for that honorary degree. And you know why? Because it makes me a member of the extraordinary class of 2019. Congratulations to my fellow graduates. It's also great to be here with so many of my fellow honorees, and I congratulate them on their honorary degrees as well. Not far from here, in a little apartment up in Providence, Rhode Island, I began the journey of my life. It is said one definition of hell is when on the last day of your life, you meet the best version of yourself, and you discover that there's a huge gap between who you are and who you could have become. Closing that gap, I've realized, is the goal of my life. Back in high school, I struggled with what I now understand to be a mental illness and addiction. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and to cope with that, I have used both alcohol and prescription painkillers to self-medicate. Now, at 51 years of age, I recently celebrated with my family a profound and humbling victory, my 8th year of continuous sobriety. But some of the mathematics majors in here should do the math. That shows that this is a long and protracted process. I don't encourage you to wait as long as I did, but of course, it doesn't always happen on our own timetable. Growing up in my family, my problems were mostly referred to, if at all, in whispers. And too much of the advice that I got was judgmental rather than medically sound and supportive. I'm very proud of my late father, Senator Edward M. Kennedy, who's one of our nation's most important champions for health care in this nation. But he really didn't understand what was going on with me was also part of health care too. When it came to my asthma or my brother's bone cancer, he was all supportive, all loving, and all in. But when it came to my mental health issues and the vicious cycle of addiction that followed, he tended to lay that one on me, rather than viewing what I was experiencing through the lens of an illness. This was a blind spot of a lot of people in his generation, and too many still hold it in your generation. More often than not, my father's diagnosis was, Patrick just needs a swift kick in the ass. Honestly, I was probably the biggest skeptic about these issues. I spent many years lost in a fog of shame. I also believed that I was suffering not from the diseases of the mind and body, but simply because of personal failings. These days, I see it more clearly. No one wakes up in the morning and chooses to alienate their family, to push away their friends, to risk losing their jobs, and to risk being arrested because they think that would be a great plan for the day. By the time I got to Rhode Island, I had already been to rehab and attempted my first of many recoveries. I worked hard at it and committed to seeing a psychiatrist, but I was so embarrassed that I used to park my car blocks away from his office. But he helped me, and I was, at the first time in my life, realizing that treatment and therapy and medication could work. I struggled with these illnesses, just like everyone else. Being a Kennedy certainly has its benefits, but I can assure you this, mental illness and addiction are in no way impressed that I come from a famous family. Untreated or unheeded, these illnesses are equal opportunity destroyers. Still, through all of this, at the age of 21, I was elected to the Rhode Island House of Representatives. The press noted that I was the youngest Kennedy ever to hold office. But the real achievement in my eyes was doing a pretty good job in the 3 terms I had at the State House, while at the same time dealing with my mental health challenges. This is when I started to realize that getting good care and good insight into my illness, even when I wasn't always the best patient, and despite some setbacks, could allow me to function and even thrive. Again, these diseases are treatable. The challenge is that society discriminates against them and the people that suffer from them. And so does the medical insurance system by not covering them properly and equally with other illnesses. So mental illnesses and addiction end up being the only diseases for which getting the gold standard of treatment is actually questioned and sometimes discouraged. When I was 27, I was elected to represent Rhode Island in the United States House of Representatives. And believe me, I did not go to Washington to become the nation's leading voice for mental health and addiction care. For several years, I tried to hide my mental health and addiction issues, and frankly, wasn't giving any attention to these issues because I was worried that it would require more personal information on my part. This is the mental health equivalent of don't ask, don't tell. Then on May 6, 2006, I woke up at 3 a.m. thinking that I was late for a vote. I drove under the influence to the Capitol building and crashed my car into a security barrier. On TV the next morning, I was forced to tell the truth. And that is one of the biggest problems you have if you have a mental illness or struggle with an addiction. It is the secrecy, the lying, the self-delusion. Our secrets are our most formidable adversaries. They are the enemy within that block our recovery. I was forced to admit what had really been going on in a way that I couldn't take back or hide from. And in the process, I found my highest calling as a public servant, fighting to make access to treatment for mental health and addiction a reality, not just for rich people like me, not just for members of Congress, but for every single person in this country. Thanks to Rhode Island, unbelievably, in spite of my arrest for a DWI, I was sent back to Congress, and it was in the following session of Congress that I got a bill passed and signed into law called the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. And wouldn't you know, the worst thing that I thought could happen to me in a political career, getting arrested for a DWI, turned out to be something that allowed every one of my colleagues in Congress to come up to me on the floor of the House of Representatives and tell me about their own personal struggles and the struggles of their family members. Because you see, no one in the Congress of the United States was public with their mental health and addiction challenges. They were struggling silently, like I was. And once I was arrested, everybody knew I was an addict. And what that meant was that all of my fellows would come up to me and say, "Patrick, can we talk over here in the corner?" And then they would tell me about their own struggles. And it was because of that that I made friends across the aisle and across the chamber, enough so that we were able to get the support we needed to pass a modern-day version of a medical civil rights bill. Because what this bill says is that we should have no more separate and unequal treatment system for the brain when compared to the rest of the body. That when you get health care, you ought to go into one door, not have to go down the hallway and get that quote-unquote mental health care that no one wants to get for fear and shame of what people will think of you if they know that you get mental health care. So this law says, as was stated, that if you have cancer, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease, insurance companies must cover you for your psychosis, depression, anxiety, addiction, whether you're inpatient in-network, outpatient in-network, inpatient out-of-network, outpatient out-of-network, or you need pharmacy or emergency room benefits. Your benefits must be the same at the primary care level, secondary care level, and tertiary care level as they would be for any other physical illness. But it doesn't end there. We ended the higher copays, the higher deductibles, the higher premiums, and the lower lifetime caps in insurance coverage. And most importantly, we said that if you're an health insurance company, you can't wrap your patients in red ink when they try to get coverage with pre-authorization, retroactive review, concurrent review. These are always the medical management practices that insurance companies use to deny you your rightful treatment under federal law. But I want to give you a bigger picture of this, since it sounds as though I'm just giving you in the weeds. The reason I tell you that is you want to be fighting every single time if you or a loved one needs this coverage to notify your insurer that it's your right to get this coverage. In this last generation, we spent trillions of dollars on cancer. My family benefited from this research and these life-saving dollars. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on all of the illnesses that were threatening our public health. None more so than HIV/AIDS, where we actually spent $24 billion a year to combat it because it was taking 53,000 American lives every year. But thankfully, because of all those dollars spent on cancer and on HIV/AIDS, we've made many cancers, and we've largely made HIV/AIDS a chronic illness. And that's because of trillions of dollars that have been spent on the part of all of us as Americans to tackle those pressing public health challenges. This is wonderful news. But against that backdrop, just this year, we lost 72,000 Americans to fatal drug overdoses. We lost more than 47,000 Americans to suicide. And my question to this country, which certainly doesn't seem to be doing anything about this, is why aren't the 120,000 American lives lost to mental illness and addiction worth the same bold commitment our country is famous for making to combat cancer and HIV/AIDS and any other major public health crisis? We're spending $5 billion now against the opioid crisis. 2 years ago was $500 million. $5 billion versus $24 billion. That's what we spent on HIV/AIDS. And the $5 billion, 1/5 of what we were spending on HIV/AIDS, is supposed to cover twice as number of people who are dying. Now, I am no math major, but I've done the math on this. And if we were to spend the same on addiction and suicide that we spent on HIV/AIDS, per life lost, we would see spending $50 billion a year in this country to tackle this, the greatest public health crisis of our time. And I'm here to tell you, the only difference between $5 billion, which is a drop in the bucket for the issue, frankly, that affects your generation more than any other generation, and the $50 billion which we should be providing, is the number of advocates out there demanding of their members of Congress and demanding of those who are running for president that they treat these illnesses no differently than they would treat any other physical illness. Consider the fact that if you spend $500 billion over 10 years, you'd still be spending only a fraction of what the president's tax cut was. And then instead of a few dollars going to those at the top of the economic ladder, this money can allow all Americans to live richer and healthier lives, an investment that will help ensure that they too discover the best versions of themselves. Because at the end of the day, regardless of your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your politics, your socioeconomic class, we all have one thing in common: our brains, which allow us to function and be ourselves. And if our brain diseases are not properly treated, we lose ourselves. And America loses what it could contribute if it had us as part of the society. It is a time of particular uncertainty, I know, for all of you. I urge you to consider meeting that uncertainty with action, to dedicating some of your valuable time and youthful energy to a cause greater than yourself, to filling in that gap and reaching for your best self, and to leaving here today in pursuit of a purpose-filled life, so that these challenges no longer seem insurmountable. Do it for yourself, and do it for all of those who are coming up behind you. Thank you very much.